It's another beautiful Sunday afternoon. This is Rubbin Minds. Welcome. My name is Ebuka Obiuchendu. Thanks a lot for joining us. And a very eventful week, especially for the economy. Here in Nigeria, we have had a lot to say about what direction the economy has been going in. It looks like the Naira has been somewhat stable for a couple of weeks now. And the president officially inaugurated the economic team, his economic advisory team this past week, including captains of industry and some members of his government. And they've been mandated to meet with him at least once a month. And the whole idea is to start a journey of growth for the economy. And we're hoping that that actually turns out to be the case. We've gone through very rough couple of months or years even, and Nigerians are hopefully ready to see things start to take a turn. But we've also been keeping our eyes on Kenya and a lot that's happened there with regards to the protests and the citizens of Kenya holding their government, especially the president, responsible for actions and policy that they have come up with. And we've seen Mr. President William Ruto of Kenya make certain reversals, and it has sparked a lot of conversations as to the power of the citizenry. We're going to be starting our conversation today talking about, what sort of inspiration you draw, especially as Nigerians, from the incident in Kenya. We're joined now from our Abuja studios by Okpeyemi. Okay, thanks a lot for joining us today. Okpeyemi, I want to start off very quickly because I think the conundrum a lot of people find themselves in, especially Nigerians, is how do you get inspired by an incident like this? Yes, we've had NSAS. We all know how it ended, but it was not necessarily on this scale. We've seen the death toll at least confirmed to be at least about 40 people killed. We've seen the president actually come out and reverse the policies and even take further measures, to cut costs in government. But there's also the flip side as to whether these sorts of protests can be contained in the Nigerian context. How do you get inspired by something like this without it looking like you're calling for anarchy in a place like this?
Ebuka, thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to share a platform with you. What is happening in Kenya right now is, I think, is a note of warning to other leaders in Africa. A continent that has 60%, population of young people under the age of 18 or 18 as average age. You realize that when government prove and continue to be insensitive and not responding to the needs of the citizenry, you realize that we can have breakdown of laws and order like we are having in Kenya right now. However, I must say that we should not, as Nigerians, not be inspired by it, because Nigerians cannot afford anarchy at the moment. We can't afford the level of violence that is ongoing in Kenya right now. You know how it is in Nigeria. And the truth of the matter is that it has not always been about the protest, because every citizen has the constitutional right to protest. However, the response of the government is always what leads to what we have now, the violence and the degeneration of law and order. So I think that the government of Kenya did not respond well to the agitations and the protest of the Kenyan youth. What are we talking about here? 16% tax on bread, 25% on cooking oil, and 2.5% tax on vehicle is with the current hardship that we are facing across the continent today. Nobody would keep quiet on that. So they had the right to actually protest, but I think that the government responded very poorly. I see that they are trying to retrace their steps, but how it's going to solve the problem that has already been created is what we don't know. Now they are calling for the resignation of the president. They've lost faith in their president, and I hope that does not happen in Nigeria. But I hope that Nigerians, I can say that the reason why most Nigerian youth will not go this route is that if you actually look through the Nigerian population or the Nigerian populace, you realize and find a group of people that love their country. You see what happened during the NSAS. It wasn't because the youth protested against police brutality. It was the response of the government that actually led to what what happened on October 20, 2020 in Nigeria. So I see that, I hope that the youth are not just inspired to go the same route. I hope that it is inspiring our leaders to do right by the citizens across the continent, not just Nigeria alone. We see what is happening in other, West African states. And we can't afford to continue to have that, on the continent. It's not good for the development that we are envisaging for the continent, and that will be determined by, the level of leadership that, or the quality of leadership that our leaders decide to serve to us as young people. Ebuka.
Yeah, I hear you, and I think the other conversation will be around, which is something I've talked about a lot on this show, is how do you hold government accountable then? We do a lot of this talking on these shows. We have all of these great ideas, but it almost seems like most times it doesn't go across the government. I mean, we've had this talk about wheat, for example, and the tax on wheat imported to Nigeria, and how the spillover effect it has on basically everything we consume, from bread and all the likes. What then is the alternative? Because yes, we have a history of protesting in this country, whether we like it or not, from the military era. Things might not be as frequent as they used to be in the past. But what then do Nigerians do to hold government accountable in a way that you get the sorts of results where the president actually listens?
Opposition is critical in any government. It is critical, right? However, how we go about, calling out government is also very important if we're not going to distort the growth our country, is seemingly enjoying or should be enjoying. As a person, I see opposition as an opportunity to help and collaborate with the government of the day to serve governance better. I ran for House of Assembly in last general election. However, I did not win. I learned. But I've found myself, offering services to people in offices, offering policy direction and advisory to them in my capacity. I've written documents to them to say this is how we can do it better, And I think that, budget is doing a very fantastic work for this country in terms of simplifying the budget. And you can know what is, zone or projects that are zoned to your constituency. How many of us actually even know what should be done in our communities, and how are we holding our elected and appointed officers, accountable to those projects, So we need to hold government accountable from knowledge point of view, from the place of knowing, not from the place of emotions. So by so doing, we can collaboratively, enjoy, the growth that we want for our communities. Yes, you can argue that it is difficult to reach our people. I actually feel that there is too much attention on the president, so we need to actually look at the subnational, government. Our governors, sadly, we are still grappling with autonomy for our local government, and which is the closest government to the people. However, in the absence of an effective and autonomous local government, can we begin to look at our members of House of Assembly, House of Reps, the Council of the Local Government Chairman, and the governors, before we even look at what is happening at the federal level? If we begin to, know what is our right, our civic right as citizens, and we reach out to these people, I think that those are better ways to actually hold government accountable. And much more importantly, this is what I actually think, much more importantly, the best way to hold government accountable is actually to be a part of the government. I see the effort of the government to include young people in decision making in terms of, by the time you look at the cabinet, both at the national and the subnational level, you see improvement in youth inclusion in decision making. The question is, these youth that are being included in one office or power, in one offices or the other, what contributions are they making to actually change, the narrative? During the Not Too Young to Run campaign by Yaga Africa, after we got what we wanted, one of the things I began to advocate for is, are we equipped to run? Do we have the competencies? Do we have the character? And do we have the capacity, as we are being taught, in a school, that I belong, the SPPG, that's the School of Politics, Policy and Governance? Do we have everything it takes? Do we have, the capacity, competence and character to actually make a difference or do it better than the current crops of leaders are doing? So I believe that one of the best ways to actually, hold government accountable is to be part of the government, and the best way is by casting our ballot, and whether we like it or not, warming up to 2027, the citizenry is better aware. We see what happened at the last general election, and I believe that, the APC-led administration will hold that, very dearly in the way they discharge their duties and, promises to the people of Nigeria. I believe that 2027 is going to be different, and I hope that we can express our feelings by invading the policy-making rooms of Nigeria, by getting young people. I mean, we have the largest young population on the continent. So who says that we cannot actually get credible, competent people into power by voting them, and by so doing it is easier for us to hold them accountable. And I'm also, an advocate for, I think we need to actually advocate for referendum in the Nigerian constitution, because those are easy ways that we can, communicate our concerns or help in policy formulation without breakdown of order and rules. And of course, that's how we can actually avoid anarchy. But of course, like as I said, we need to hold government accountable from the point of knowledge, not from the point of emotion. I understand how we feel, but do we even know what is in the constitution? Do we know what is in the budget? Do you know your civic right? These are, I think, we can actually hold government accountable, and our so-called social media influencers need to do better in terms of using their platform for civic engagement, for young people to be involved and be carried along, at every level possible in governance.
All right, we have another guest joining us virtually, Achike Chude, who's a public affairs analyst, and I want to go to him very quickly. Mr. Chude, like I did say earlier, we do have a strong history of protest in this country, and it does seem sometimes, even if I was a lot younger at the time, that we saw protests more frequently under the military than we are seeing now. On the one hand, it could be that maybe there's fewer things to protest about, but on the other hand, when we've seen, like I say, the way NSAS ended, and are we at a point now where we should have learned, from those who did it in the 90s, how they went about it, or are we being scarred over the years by, a government that's, almost, for the most part, doesn't tolerate protests, for want of a better phrase. I mean, we've seen recently, we saw a governor a few days ago order one of his security operatives to slap a religious leader in his presence. We've seen ministers tell permanent secretaries to bow in front of the president. It's almost like, power has been taken away from people to even speak up and hold government accountable. Is that where we are now?
I think I'm not exactly sure what lessons were learned, after the NSAS protest, because I think the purpose of the protest was clear. The demands of the protesters were clear, and there was general agreement really that things were not working well for the country. And there was also general agreement that the basis for the protest was, motivated by a sense of patriotism. We wanted things, or the younger people wanted things to change, and they did not want things to remain the same, with the obvious consequences, of the economic morass that has been brought about by negligent and irresponsible political leadership in the country, and so it was obviously born out of a sense of patriotism and the desire for our country to be better than it is. Than she is. And of course, we saw how people responded generally. And then we also saw the response of the government. There was also the usual high-handedness by security forces, and then an attempt to also penetrate the NSAS movement by various government forces to change the narrative. Because, there was a general consensus, even here and internationally, that it was something that was, done with a lot of maturity, and even the protesters were being praised for the way they went about it. But the thing about such protests is that if they are not addressed quickly and easily, before you know it, it begins, the dynamics and the narrative and then the motivation and all that begin to change. And you will know that at the initial stage, it started off as a protest against police brutality, and the brutality by other security forces, especially the police. But sooner or later, it will fail into something else, into politics. Because you see, there are questions you have to ask that are not just social, but that are political. And it's like the famous French bishop A Brazilian bishop said that if he says that the people have no bread, they call him a saint. But when he says, why do the people, they ask, why do the people not have bread? They call him a communist and a troublemaker. So the people, it started off as a protest against the police, then they indoctrinated into other issues. Because when you ask the question, why are the police, for instance, not being paid well? When you ask the question, why are we where we are in a country that is supposedly blessed with all manners of riches, both natural and then the blessings from a teeming population, then these are political questions, and the answers are found at the realm of politics. And that was why, before you know it, the questions and the motivation for the protest began to change, and it became political. They wanted to engage, they wanted the country to be better, and so on. These are political issues. And it is the same thing with the Kenyan protest. It started off, yes, as a protest against hardship, a protest against difficulties, lack of jobs and all that. A protest essentially against, the increase in taxes and all that, and all that. And then before you know it again, it was inevitable that they would begin to ask political questions. It came down to the issue also of why is it that government officials, in spite of our hardship, are living lives of luxury, impervious to the kind of poverty that we have in our land. And these issues also came up during the NSAS protest. People were asking questions. Now, what has been learned? Governments all over the country, state and federal, set up all manners of committees, to come up with, fact finding, first of all, about what happened, and then to recommend ways forward. And we have seen the response, really. Ultimately, at the end of the day, politicians have continued to live large. They have continued to earn tremendous, allowances. They have continued to purchase jeeps and all that. Even when there's a general argument that we cannot afford, our economy cannot sustain this, kind of lifestyle, it has continued unabatedly. And then you now have, the workers, demanding for an increase in their minimum wage, and then the argument is that the country cannot, our economy cannot sustain it. But it can sustain the lifestyle of the political class and the elites, but it cannot sustain that of the ordinary people when it comes to the minimum wage and the rest. So this is the issue. So it becomes very difficult to say that actually lessons have been learned. They are good guys. When you talk about the political spectrum in this country, I think there are politicians that also understand how far this country has fallen, that also understand the potentials for greatness of Nigeria. Because the reality is that people have argued across the continent, that Nigeria is holding Africa back because of the great potentialities that this country has. If we can get it right with political leadership, I think the rest of Africa will follow the continent. But nobody is going to wait for Nigeria to step up. Others are doing their bit. That if Nigeria is not ready to live up to our responsibility, let them do what they can do. So I'm not exactly sure that our political elites have learned any serious lessons. And we must be careful, because you see, if somebody, I think, said something about, about a situation of total or complete or permanent passivity on behalf of the people, being contrary to the laws of nature, that sooner or later there will be a form of resistance. And so the answers happening at that particular point in time continues to provide, a source of example for the politicians to realize that there is always a calm before the storm. And so they should not take it for granted that victory, a victory has been sustained against those people who were agitating for a change in the country. That change has not happened, and it appears that all is calm on the Western Front. That calmness is what we should be wary of. We must avoid any, situation that will throw this country into, anarchy. And so good governance ultimately is key to getting, to avoiding any situation of anarchy. Lastly, let me just say this. We have seen what is happening in other parts of the continent, where it pushes illegally and illegitimately overthrow governments. The question you ask, even in spite of the anger, for instance, that the military boys will still dare at this particular point in time in the 21st century to believe that they have the solution to the problems of their country, which in most cases, it doesn't ever happen. But the question that has to be asked is, why do they do this? Simple, bad governance. And the only antidote to bad governance and preventing these people permanently from making any incursion into the political terrain is to ensure good governance, and as an antidote to bad governance.
Okay, so I like that you brought up, government spending there, because I mean, we've had this conversation since this president came into power. How much was spent on cars for members of the National Assembly, how much was spent on the vice president's residence. Now there's this whole debate about the presidential air fleets, needing to change. And we saw the Kenyan president, as a result of the protests, he cut budget for the first lady's office, dissolved about 47 state agencies. So many things were done, and we even saw him, I think a couple of days ago, host a space on Twitter, called X now, with citizens, where there were questions directly to him. Some even called him a liar to his face on this space. Are we here in Nigeria at a point now where for almost a decade now, we've hardly seen a presidential media chat, sort of happen, where Nigerians even sort of interface directly with governments? Now, I guess my question is, with the Kenyan situation, we saw the presidential candidates of the Labour Party saying that, credit has to go to, or politicians need to learn from President Ruto, the fact that he listened to his people. Is this the Nigerian situation now? We always say Nigerians are very, resilient. I hate that word really a lot. Is it the Nigerian people being too docile that's making things work the way they are? The politicians to blame for just not listening and paying attention to what the people actually want? Or are both parties guilty?
Yeah, well, resilience, again, I don't blame you for having problems with that word. Resilience can have a negative value or a positive value. If you are, resilient to the point of maybe somebody taking what belongs to you, and somehow you're able to be able to carry on. I'm not exactly sure that that will be positive resilience. I think resilience is supposed to have a positive value. About your attempt, and the efforts you have made to overcome challenges continually, and to get things to be better. So it shouldn't be from a negative perspective of having to bear the brunt of bad governance and then, wading through and surviving it, and then people are saying that you are resilient. That, I think, is negative. Yes, you're talking about the Ruto's response and the fact that even people calling a liar to it and all that. It's worse in the democracies that we try to copy. In some democracies, you have instances where water is thrown at the prime minister or the president and all that, and then the person is not killed. Obviously, if he has committed an offense by assaulting the president or the prime minister, there are laws that should take care of that. But there is not about throwing somebody in jail for about 25 years, because there is a basis really for public angst. And this is, this happens in country where the leadership feels some level of obligation to the people, based essentially on the fact that they know that the people will determine their political fate, and that such leadership do not have to manipulate the electoral process, for the purpose, of getting back to power, regardless of the sentiment of the people. And you have seen what happened in the United Kingdom, for instance. Rishi Sunak just came in and said, look, that they disappointed the people, and that he is himself responsible for the failure of the Conservative Party. Now, the Conservative Party, knowing fully well that they were going to be beaten, they are going to be annihilated in that election, they did not look for ways to manipulate the process to prevent the proper response of the people, with regards to the bad governance that they have undergone under their tutelage under their tenure for about 13, 14 years. They just allowed the process to play out, and the people eventually had a say. And so for Ruto again, and I think again should go to the Nigerian people. We remember how Ruto came to power. Remember that the political platform on which he ascended the enemy to power was essentially a relatively new platform. Ruto is not from a silver spoon family, like the Kenyatta family, for instance, and some of the other political big establishments in Kenya. So that was why he rode on the back of the popular support of the people, especially the young ones. And the young ones feel duty bound to also call it to order, because there's a general belief that they were the ones that are put into power, that are put in power. Therefore, they can call him to account. And I think there's a general recognition by Ruto that he had to answer to the people. And that's why you see why he did that social media engagement with the people. He seems to have an understanding that the people should have power, over governance in the country. And so it has worked well, I think, to a very large extent. The way he's been responding, talking about bringing down government expenditure in so many ways, telling government functionaries that they're cutting down on their allowances and their salaries and all that. That's a direct response. And I think that is a positive thing. That we have not seen in Nigeria. We have been talking about this, the cost of governance for decades, right? Decades now. And what we have seen is an increase in government expenditure in the lives of government officials. And so this is something that I think, and again, we must appeal to the conscience of the politicians and the political elites. I think that within their fold are people who want to do the right thing. Within their fold are people who believe that perhaps they have gone against the grain for far too long in this country, and that they need to redress issues. Okay. But I think it has become very difficult because you now have a system that is firmly established, and so change has become very difficult. So I think that the people can help them with this change. And I think my friend in the studio there, I think was talking about the work that organizations like Budget have been doing. Now, why does Budget do what Budget does? People don't understand. When Budget brings this information to the general public, he says what they are saying is that, see what is going on, we have brought it to your notice. Now run with it, see what you do with it to change the situation. They have done their own bit, and so we need to do much more, obviously.
Okay. Let me go to Okpeyemi very quickly. Okpeyemi, just in one sentence, if you can. You've had Achikechude there speak, and I think I just want to get from you now, what does the future look like with regards to government interaction with Nigerians? Yes, you've spoken to the fact that young people need to get more involved, but the government, on the other hand, also need to do their part. I keep talking about the fact that we literally had our national anthem changed without Nigerians being told or asked. Does it look like the government is going to be doing anything different going forward for you?
The truth is, I think if we look at the policy direction of the government, and of course the recent interventions as being, made by the federal government, we see that we may be heading out of this hardship like pretty soon. However, I think that the government needs to do a lot more, especially the subnational government. I saw that President Tinubu chaired the economic committee meeting recently, and of course we could see now he's giving deadlines to subnational government on what to do. I just want to hope that Nigeria gets better. I hope that our leaders are learning, from what is happening in Kenya right now. I hope that it forces them to want to engage more with the citizenry. I hope that it forces them to implement, some of these policies that are in paper, and we can bring succor and, of course, reduce this inflationary pressure, on Nigerians. I hope that we can begin to see investment in security. I hope that we can, get back our security architecture and intelligence gathering to ensure that, banditry, insecurity becomes a thing of the past, and our farmers can go back to farm, and we can fight food inflation, and of course food prices can crash, and we can begin to see investment into MSMEs, especially people living in underserved communities that are people that are in the farm and producing the food, that the nation consumes. And I hope very strongly that we increase our tax net and not necessarily increase our tax rate, as we have seen. I see the suspension of the levy that the CBN brought in recently. That is being responsive to the people. What we need to do, I think, very recently, I think sometimes last week, I saw Smedan, brought out the informal sector report. I hope that we can pick that, and in collaboration with Federal Ministry of FMITI, Industry, Trade and Investment, and PEBEC and other relevant ministries, and agencies, we can begin to see how to capture our informal sector, formalize them and bring them into tax net, digitize our tax processes. Instead of increasing the rate, can we actually widen the net? By so doing, let's deliver on promises that we have made to the citizenry. And it is also critical, Ebuka, that we don't pay lip services to implementing the Onsai report and reducing the cost of governance. We need to actually make sure that we implement it to the letters. I don't think government has any business with pilgrimages. I don't think, I think these monies can be invested into critical sector.
Okay, thank you very much from Abuja studios. We need to go now. Thank you very much also to Achike for joining us virtually. I mean, this conversation is very extensive, so I understand the passion. Hopefully, when we come back again to have this conversation in the near future, we will have better things and happier conversations about Nigeria. Thanks a lot for joining us. We're going to take a quick break now. We'll be right back. Please stay with us.